Hello, welcome back to a chapter day. Happy Sabbath. I know I skipped 2 days. I am not getting into the seasonal thing really, but I kind of, had some running around to do, and maybe I am partly into the seasonal thing, but I was also trying to prepare a review for 1kings, and there were so many events. I was trying to see how best I could summarize it without going into too much detail. So I hope I did a good job on it, but here goes. So we are finished with the book of 1kings, and we are going into 2kings. So I'm just going to do a review and hope to keep it as itemized as possible without too much details. Okay, so firstly we encounter David. He's now old, and his son Adonijah decides he's going to proclaim himself king, and without even letting his father know. So he got some followers, and when David found out, I think with the prompting of Nathan the prophet, Bathsheba, which is Solomon's mother, Uriah's wife, we know the story, went to Nathan went to Bathsheba to tell her, hey, Adonijah is being proclaiming himself king. You need to go to David and remind him that Solomon is supposed to be king, because she and Solomon would have been in some trouble with Adonijah had he become king, because they might have ostracized Solomon. So she did just what Nathan the prophet told her to do, went before David, and David honored that promise to make Solomon king. So he requested that Nathan the prophet and one of the priests and one of his other servants go with Solomon, anoint him, proclaim him king, put him on David's own donkey and ride him around so everyone would know this is the new king. And he also had Solomon sit on his throne. So when Adonijah and his followers and Joab, which was one of David's captains, went over to Adonijah, kind of treachery, yeah. When they heard all the noise, and someone, of course, told them what was happening, that Solomon was being proclaimed king, Adonijah got scared and ran to the temple, held on to the horns of the altar, and requested absolution, if that's what it's called. And of course, Solomon in his graciousness pardoned him. But later on, Adonijah did another stupid thing, which was to ask Solomon's mother, that's after Solomon became king, to ask Solomon's mother Bathsheba to allow him to have Abishag, which was David's wife. And this was after David died, okay? So then Solomon realized, you know what, Adonijah is going to be a thorn in my flesh, and he had him killed, because Adonijah was starting to ask for things. Sooner or later he was going to be a threat to Solomon. So in the end, yeah, Solomon did have to kind of get him out of the way. But before David's death, he spoke to Solomon concerning keeping the Lord's judgments and laws. He also gave him caution about certain people like Joab, who had, abdicated over to Adonijah. Shimei, who was one of Saul's relatives, who was bad-mouthing David in his own face, throwing stones at him when Absalom was acting up and trying to go to war with his father. And then Abiathar the priest, which also had abdicated over to Adonijah's side. So these were all considered traitors on David's list, and he told Solomon to be wise about it. So Solomon had to take care of them, as we say in our terms. So again, Joab was another one who ran to the temple and grabbed the horns of the altar, but he killed him right there in the temple. Shimei was banished to another city and later on left because of some incident or the other, and when Solomon heard of it, he had him killed. And then Abiathar, he was stripped of his priesthood. So that was the taking care of those people who might have been a threat. And I think, we allow God to take care of our enemies today. Back then, they did it themselves. As Christians, we pray about things and God takes care of it in his best way. And then now Solomon had a dream in which God visited him and asked him to request anything of him. I mean, wouldn't you, oh my God, would I love to have such a dream or such a visit from God? And Solomon asked for an understanding heart to judge the people over whom he ruled. And God was so pleased with his request that God added unto him not just wisdom, but riches. And God also gave him peace among his enemies. For the time that Solomon ruled, there was no war in Israel. Isn't that something? Oh my gosh, all the days. And his fame and his wisdom went out throughout all the lands. I mean, people were hearing of the riches. Kings were just sending him gifts. Oh my gosh. And we're talking about gold. And maybe not the little nonsense gold as we treasure these little trinkets. Gold in abundance, and silver and ivory and peacocks and apes and things. I mean, we talk about rich people today. There was none that could touch Solomon's riches. And the Lord said so. Before him and after him, there will be none like him. So Solomon was rich. So people heard. I mean, word gets around. Even when there was no internet or emails, word got around about this man, this king of Israel, and how blessed he is, how wise he is, and how rich. So he built a house for God, a temple in which he spared no expense. I mean, God owns everything. Okay, even what man takes to make something that is so precious and worthwhile is materials from what God has already placed there. So 7 years he spent building the temple of God. And when he was finished, and he also used materials. David also, because David wanted to build the temple of God, but God told him no. David's hand was too bloody. And that's why he gave Solomon peace. So Solomon could focus only on building the temple and not fighting off enemies. So David was not able to build the temple, but he laid aside materials that before he died, he informed Solomon that these were the materials to build God's house. And every gift Solomon got, he put aside something, like a tithe almost, to build God's house. Okay, so when he was finished, he held a great feast where he prayed for the people, kneeling down with his hands stretched to heaven, talking to God about blessing the people once they came to that place. And even if they were in captivity, they did wrong and he allowed them to go into captivity, if they prayed with their face towards the temple, or if they were in the temple, or if any that maybe just thought of being in the temple, that God would hear and answer their prayers. And like I mentioned, that temple was their symbol of God with them. Today we have these temples. God, through the Holy Spirit, dwells in our hearts. We don't have to be physically present in a building for God to be with us. Some people maybe still think so, that if they don't go to a building, that God will not hear them. That's not true. You can stand in a crowd of 1 million people and your heart can be lifted up to God and God will hear you. But with Solomon's time and Solomon's temple, they felt like they needed to be in that temple, and they maybe did. The temple was God's symbol of his presence with them. Okay, so after they did a great sacrifice, tens of thousands of animals were sacrificed and given up on behalf of the people. And God honored it by visiting Solomon again a second time. In addition, Solomon had built a house for himself I think after God visited him, he told him he would have his house built, but his house took 13 years to build. And I'm not sure if it was building and simultaneously with the temple or after God visited him the second time. Okay, so God visited him after that, and after he consecrated the temple, told him that if he walked in his ways and honored him, he would bless him and give him peace and give him prosperity. But if he turned away, that he would cut the temple off. He would not honor that temple anymore, and the people would not be hallowed in his sight. Isn't it just like us today? Some people think, hey, I accepted Christ one time, that works for me all through my lifetime. It doesn't matter what I do, where I go, what I say, my life is set. That's not true. There are stipulations because God cannot dwell in an unclean heart. This is where God dwells in us, and through the Holy Spirit, as I said, in our hearts. And I think it's not this beating piece of flesh. It's something here. We don't fully understand it. In our spirits, in our minds, it's all connected. And that's where God dwells. So he told him, if not, he will cut the people off and cut him off. And later on, we saw that happening. Solomon loved women, which is a good thing nowadays especially, but he took many pagan wives. Pharaoh's daughter and women of Sidon and Edom and Moab and Ammon, all of these people, even though they might have been their relatives, through Israel, but still they were not God-fearing people. They were more enemies of Israel. Don't know why he went there, but anyway, he did. So they caused him to follow after their gods. I mean, you know what? It always seems to work that way. Even when we know better, the people who are ungodly come into our lives and they pull us out of the godly atmosphere in which we found ourselves before, and we end up doing the foolish things that they do instead of the other way around. You know why? Because we are just naturally inclined to do wrong. And unless we have God working in our hearts 24/7, working and holding fast to God, we are so liable to slip away. So people who say, once I accept God, everything is well with me, in your heart and mind how you stray. Even just in your thoughts, sometimes you got to keep pulling yourself back and say, no, God, help me to control my thoughts. Help me to keep my thoughts uplifted. So, after hearing of Solomon's wisdom, Queen of Sheba came to visit him. She herself was wealthy, so she brought him gifts, gold, silver, peacocks, whatever. And she was so impressed with his wisdom, and not just that, the wealth of this man. Or even his servants looked like they were maybe kings or influential people because they weren't dressed shabbily. Okay, the order of his house. So she gave him some expensive gifts, and he in turn answered her many questions which she had, and she blessed him also. She was so amazed, told him, God really chose him to be the leader of Israel. And he in turn gave her also some things that she asked for. But his idolatry angered God. You see how we could be in such great standing with God and we still do foolish things? And God is not going to tolerate it. God is not going to tolerate our nonsense. So, because of his idolatrous ways, God was angered, and God pronounced that he would cut off his kingdom and give it to his servant, Jeroboam. So after that announcement, and also I believe Jeroboam was anointed by a prophet. Ahijah, I think the prophet, anointed Jeroboam, and when Solomon heard of this, he was after Jeroboam to kill him. Very much like how Saul was after his father David, he was after Jeroboam to kill him. So Jeroboam had to run away to Egypt. God also sent in enemies to fight against Israel after he had all that peace that God gave him. But he reigned for 40 years and then he died. And his son Rehoboam began to reign in his stead. Now, Rehoboam and Jeroboam heard of when Solomon died and David died, so he thought he'd come back because now coast is clear. And he asked Rehoboam, hey, to kind of ease up on, the punishment that they were suffering, But Rehoboam listened to his young advisors rather than the old men who told him, yes, ease up on these men, let them come back and serve you. He listened to the younger men and said, nah, we're going to make it even tougher for you. So Jeroboam decided, you know what? You can keep Judah, I'll take Israel. God did give him in the prophecy 10 tribes of Israel. That's Jeroboam. So now he ruled 10 tribes of Israel, and Rehoboam just had maybe 1.5 tribes. So they were at war. Rehoboam and Jeroboam, Israel and Judah, they were just fighting. The first war that they were going into, God intervened and they dispersed. Okay? But because the temple was in Jerusalem. Jeroboam started thinking, you see, when we start thinking on our own and we don't let God work and continue working in our hearts and minds, Jeroboam starts thinking, we have these people here in Israel have to go to Jerusalem, which is part of Judah, to do their worship in the temple there. And when they go, Rehoboam is in charge of Judah. What if he turns the people against me? What if the people don't want to follow me anymore and I lose my power? So he was kind of thinking about his own power. So what he decided to do? Dishonor God. Dishonor the God who put you in place. He decides to make 2 golden calves. Sounds familiar? Egypt, back to Egypt again. Coming out of Egypt, I should say. Make 2 golden calves and have the people of Israel worship these things and commit idolatry. Man, I tell you, I don't know how God has so much patience. But anyway, of course, God was not pleased and he sent a prophet. And God is always sending somebody to them, rather than just strike them down right away. And this prophet came to him. They never named the prophet. This is just a prophet that came out of Judah and came to Jeroboam and told him about this altar that and Jeroboam just grabbed any old body to be priest. Okay, he just made anybody priest and not the Levites. So when he was sacrificing on the altar, the prophet came to him and told him, this altar will be broken down and God will take the kingdom out of Jeroboam's hand. So Jeroboam, of course, didn't like what the prophet said. Tried to grab the prophet maybe to attack him, and his hand withered. Implored, he begged the prophet to pray to God, and God restored his hand. And you think he turned away from his wickedness after that? Nope, still encouraged the people into idolatry. Now the prophet, there was this odd story, I always call it an odd story, in this whole scenario. The same prophet that talked to Jeroboam was told by God, the angel or God that appeared to him earlier, don't turn aside. When you go to deliver this message to Jeroboam, do it and then just go straight back home. Jeroboam invited him to dine and wine with him, and maybe happy that his hand was restored. He told him no. He was just going on his way with his donkey. Another prophet, here's what was told by his sons, what this other prophet did with Jeroboam and the altar and the proclamation. And he sends after that prophet. He goes after that prophet and lies to him and tells him, an angel of the Lord told me that you should come home with me. And the other prophet, knowing what God already told him, decides to follow him, believes him and follows him. A lesson to us, when God speaks to us, let it stay. And stop trying to listen to the voice of other people. Stop trying to listen to the voice of other people. Let it stay. And that's a message from me too. Sometimes I have to try and discern which one is which. But we have to, with the discernment of God, work and let God work in our lives. God help us. So he went back with this other prophet, and after he wined and dined with him, he was going back on his way with his donkey, and a lion met him and killed him. Didn't mangle him or anything, just killed him. And the donkey stood there, the lion stood there, and the man was dead. The other prophet went by, saw what happened, and he said it's because he didn't follow what the Lord said. Voila, took up the man, buried him. It's very symbolic. And I know that lion definitely is Satan. Okay? And that man is us when we don't listen to the voice of God. So, wow. So after that, Jeroboam is still reigning in his wicked ways. God told him he would not have a son left. All his sons would die either in the field or on the roadways, however it would be. Because of his idolatry, he would be punished. Now Judah, which is the other sets of tribes, not Israel, decides that they too are going to turn to idolatry. I can think it's a whole copycat nation of people, just like us today. So the king of Egypt comes up against Judah. Rehoboam, which is the leader of Judah, he dies, and his son Abijam takes over. He's at war with Jeroboam too, because remember again, the two sides, the nation is divided into two, Israel, Judah. So they're warring against each other. After Abijam, you have Asa. He died with some sort of foot disease, but he was doing good in God's sight for some measure. He removed the idols that his father had put there, but he also did some things that were not pleasing in God's sight, and he died. I think he was killed by Baasha. Baasha also killed the sons of Jeroboam. This was somebody new that came up. I don't know how some of these people came into power, if they were relatives or prophesied into. So he killed the sons of Jeroboam. As God had prophesied, Jeroboam's sons would not live. And then God spoke to the prophet Jehu against Baasha, who was the one that killed Jeroboam and Jeroboam's sons, and pronounced destruction to his house because of what he did to Asa, I guess. Now, his servant Zimri destroys his house, which is Baasha's house. And then finally, all of that leads in after Zimri, after Baasha, we come up to Ahab, who is a descendant of through that path of evilness. And guess what? He also is evil, and he marries an evil woman called Jezebel, a daughter of a Baal worshiper. Whoa, two of them have Israel in a mess. And they're promoting idolatry like crazy. So God sends Elijah the prophet to talk to Ahab. Tell him there'll be no rain. There'll be a famine in this land for a number of years. And Elijah, of course, and his wife Jezebel are seeking to kill Elijah because of this proclamation. So God sends Elijah to a place to hide, where he feeds him until it's time for him to move on and give Ahab the news that the famine is about to be lifted. There would be rain. In the meantime, Elijah is trying to show the people of Israel, hey, we need to show you who God is. You need to see who God is once and for all, and decide which way you're going, Baal or God. So he has Baal, the prophets of Baal do their show with their sacrifices, call down fire, wet the sacrifice, water and fire don't mix. So of course, nothing happened with their sacrifices. So Elijah mocked at them, and then he showed them the power of God by making a trench around his sacrifice with water, and God consumed it with fire. And that's how the people came back to the knowledge that there is just one true God, to worship him. So Elijah killed all of Jezebel's prophets, hundreds of them, because she did the same thing, and she killed God's prophets. That's why some of them had to go hide. Now, when Elijah hears that Jezebel is coming after him, for some reason he becomes afraid and he runs to a cave to hide. And God comes after him and asks him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he told God, you know what? There are all these people in Israel, they don't worship you anymore. I'm the only one. God told him, really, no, not so. I have about 7,000 prophets who have not bowed to Baal at all. So it's not just you. So God told him to come out of that cave, okay? And to go and he's going to send him to anoint a new king for Syria, Ben-Hadad, and also he's going to find a new prophet, okay? He's also going to have Jehu, I think, is going to be the leader of Judah. So Ahab goes out, and let's see, he does what God says. Elisha is following after him.